Welcome back, everyone, to Tell Your Story Alaska. Today, we're going to dive straight into our next two villages of Birch Creek and Brevig Mission. Birch Creek is a very remote and small village. My first impression of Birch Creek is that it's in the middle of nowhere. It lies in the Yukon Flats in central eastern Alaska. It's about 25 miles south of Fort Yukon, which is on the Yukon River. And Birch Creek just seems to be in kind of a random place in the middle of this huge, open, flat tundra. It seems to sit in a random place. That's a little bit confounding to me. How did that end up happening? It does sit on a small river called Birch Creek. There are no roads to this village, and it's notable to me that it's in a really random spot in the middle of the tundra. Just kind of like you're, hiking along in the tundra and you're like, let's build here. And it just seems like a random place to me looking on Google Earth. So let's talk about Birch Creek's story. Birch Creek first shows up in the census in 1940 with a population of 32 people. Now, in the last census of 2020, the population was 35. So Birch Creek has basically remained the same size over the years. According to the most recent data available, the population is 100% native, and we'll find out why in a little bit. This is actually the first time I've seen this 100% figure for any village. Is Birch Creek 100% Native Alaskan? So clearly it's purely a native place. Now, something unique about Birch Creek, and I usually don't talk about this, even though I always see these data points, is that what the median income in Birch Creek is. It was just very different than every other village. In most villages, the median income lies between $40,000 and $60,000 per year, but in Birch Creek, the median income is $11,250. So it's just notably lower. Now, this data point is kind of old. I think it's from 2010, but even for 2010, it's surprisingly low. So I'm not really sure what to make of that exactly. I've never been to Birch Creek. I don't know anything other than what I've researched. But it does indicate to me that the people are able to live on very little money. And so I'm impressed by that. So the small amount income probably means they live significantly off the land. Now, today, residents of Birch Creek still follow subsistence living practices. They harvest salmon, whitefish, moose, black bear, waterfowl, and berries. Birch Creek does have some unique extreme temperatures. The lowest recorded temperature was -71 and the highest was 97. That's an incredible swing of temperature. Birch Creek, the river, is free of ice from mid-June to mid-October, which means while I was growing up in the Chicago area, my hometown felt summer for several months by the time their creek was just breaking up with ice. So much more of a wintry place. So this makes me ask the question, what is the history of this place? How did this community spring up in such a seemingly random place in the middle of the tundra flats just south of Fort Yukon in central eastern Alaska? Well, historically, this general area was occupied by the Dendu Gwich'in Athabascan people, and they lived semi-permanently in camps in the area, moving to wherever the resources were. Dendu Gwich'in means the foothill mountain people, so that kind of describes the area where they live, being at sort of the base of the Brooks Range. Now, here's a bit more of the more modern story. In 1862, a clergyman from Fort Yukon visited a small camp along Birch Creek to provide fish for the Hudson Bay Company out of Fort Yukon. Now, the Hudson Bay Company is still around today. It started in 1670 out of Canada, obviously around the Hudson Bay up there. And it has been a prominent business presence throughout the last for centuries. I actually spent time like reading on the Hudson Bay Company, and I realized that was a bunny trail I did not want to go down. Needless to say, though, this company's been around for a long time, very influential. And obviously, they had a small outpost in Fort Yukon. And from Fort Yukon, they had this little fish camp where they harvested fish for the company. Now, this clergyman out of Fort Yukon, I did not find his name, but he made the first written reference to this village in 1862. Now, there are speculations that scarlet fever annihilated this camp in the 1880s, but it's not very clear if that really happened. So that's kind of an uncertainty thing in history. In 1898, a man known as Birch Creek Jimmy was considered a great chief among chiefs in his day. It's kind of like how we say like Jesus is King of Kings. Birch Creek Jimmy was a chief of chiefs, chief among chiefs in his day. He built a cabin a few miles downstream from the present location of Birch Creek. Now, this immediately made me ask if Jimmy's cabin still exists. I was curious, like, could you go check out his cabin? And after a little bit of digging, I found that it does still exist, built in 1898. So cabins can last that long. Several years after building his cabin, his extended family joined him in the area, and in 1916, they moved 3 miles upstream at the site of Birch Creek, where it sits today. Birch Creek was used as a seasonal base for harvest activities until the 1950s, when a school was built and people began living there permanently. However, the school closed in 1999 due to a lack of students. Although the school building is still there, and it looks like it's still quite usable as a community building. I'm not sure if they use it. I assume they do because it looks like it's still a decent building. But as a result, students must either be homeschooled or be sent away to another village for their schooling. Now, Birch Creek has no running water or sewer system as of 2015. However, there is a potable water system where residents can haul clean water from the water filtration system there in the village. Now, the data I found was from 2015, so maybe they have something different now. But also as 2015, all they had was a landline available in the village for outside connection. However, today with just the upgraded technology, almost certainly they have some satellite system or, Elon Musk's Starlink is really popular in Alaska because it just works really, really well. So almost certainly they have something like that today. Residents of Birch Creek get around primarily by ATV and snow machine. The data I found says no one in the village owns a car or a truck. You can take a riverboat in and out of Birch Creek in the summer, or you can snow machine to Fort Yukon in the winter. And it's about 25 miles by the way of the crow. And so it's really wouldn't be too bad of a snow machine ride to Fort Yukon. Now, I did find the Birch Creek Tribal Constitution. These are interesting documents that I've been finding for these villages, and I read through them. They do provide interesting insight into the communities, and I'm going to share some of the most notable with you. Most notably, according to this constitution, you must be an Alaskan native to be considered a Birch Creek Tribe member, which is probably why 100% of the residents are native. So if I were to apply to be a member, I would immediately not qualify because I am Swedish and German. I'm a white man, so I could not live in Birch Creek. It's clear that Birch Creek seeks to maintain its native identity and heritage. But the Constitution also is encouraging its members to attend the local Episcopal church called St. Peter's Birch Creek. So I'd say that this does go to show what the scriptures say, that every tribe and nation and tongue will acknowledge the lordship of Christ, including the residents of Birch Creek. There is no need for sacrifice of cultural identity to become a follower of Jesus. In many ways, cultural identity is found, and it's by gaining a true understanding of your ancestral heritage in biblical history, as we all come from Adam and Eve. It does root yourself in who you truly are. And so, in a lot of ways, these native cultures, these remote cultures that are coming to Christ, are gaining their true cultural identity in beautiful ways. So, now in the latest Birch Creek Tribal Council newsletter, which is from 2018, it talks about putting up new street lamps, buying a new trash incinerator, and wanting to find someone to operate it. It talks about cleanup efforts to make the community clean. It talks about a fire safety course that many residents took. I liked reading these. There's just something so homey to me about these little small town issues that these small communities come together and help each other with. It's just kind of like cozy for me to read, and I like it. Now, according to the Constitution, the vision of Birch Creek, according to the Tribal Council, is, quote, to have a thriving, healthy, safe community that values our culture and traditions while pursuing and encouraging sustainable economical and personal growth opportunities. So, obviously, an excellent vision for Birch Creek. The Tribal Council is said in a report that they want to prioritize health and wellness by hiring a village health aide and provide behavioral health workshops. I had a typo here. It says worships, but it means workshops. They want to renovate a home for a priest to come and to run the local church. And they want to hold monthly game/movie nights. We do that in our home. We do game/movie nights. It's like the night we look forward to. So I love that this happens in a small community. I suspect it happens in the school building, which is available. It also says they engage in substance activities such as berry picking. Like they'll get little groups together to go berry picking. So I love the small town feel of reading about Birch Creek, all the 30-some residents there. You hope you have a lot of camaraderie and small town feel. And they have that unity of being this very remote place, all 30-some residents. Now, there is an airstrip in Brevig Mission, which was built in 1973. Although in pictures I found online, the Birch Creek Airport sign says since 1978. So who knows? I don't know when it was actually built, but it's a 4,000-foot gravel runway, and it's usually used by Wright's Air, which is a charter service out of Fairbanks. I have not used Wright's Air, but I know plenty of people who have. It's a good charter service. All right, that is Birch Creek, Alaska, a very small, 100% native village, which I thought was really interesting. All right, our next village is Brevig Mission. There was a lot of information about Brevig Mission, so I'm going to plow through this stuff, but just know I left out, there's a lot of story involved in this podcast. Is tell your story. I want to emphasize story. And so I am going to tell some of the story, but it was hard because I had to leave so much of the storyness out of Brevig Mission. And it seems like, it's called Brevig Mission because of missionaries. And so whenever there was a missionary involved, there's a lot of records. And when you have records, you get the stories. And this is a side note, but it's like almost like something I grieve. I've been straining to find records of Native American people, from before outside contact. Who were they? What did they believe? What was their life like? The information is so scant. It's frustrating, but I'm wildly curious about it. But I digress. Let's talk about Brevig Mission's story. Now, this area was originally inhabited by, and I tried to look up how to pronounce this word, and I couldn't find it, so I'm going to blow it. But it's the Kauwerak Eskimos, also known as Inuits. Now, some people say the term Eskimo is offensive. Inuit people themselves have told me that it's not offensive. Others told me that it is. So if I use the word here and there because it's in a lot of the literature. So if you find it offensive, the fault is mine, but not intended. So the Kauwerak Eskimos or Inuits lived in this area before the outside arrivals, and they lived in migratory communities. They seem to have traded with people in Siberia, Little Diomede, and King Island. And they also had alliances with people in Little Diomede and whales for protection. Now, it's interesting to me that it seems like they had normal trade with people in Siberia. And so, we think of the narrative of Native Americans coming across the Bering Strait and arriving in Alaska, and then the water levels changed so that they were cut off or whatever. But it does look like they actually had regular trade. Like they had seafaring capabilities to cross the sea, and it's really not that far. And these are capable people. So it looks like they did have trade with the native people of Siberia, who are genetically the same as native Alaskans. So that's very interesting. All right. Now, in the late 1800s, Sheldon Jackson, who's an important figure in America's history, who was a Presbyterian missionary, and this guy was a mover and a shaker. You should go back and listen to the History of the Church in Alaska series with Adam London. He expands much more in Sheldon Jackson. But this is a guy who really made things happen. He was also controversial for his promotion of wanting to Americanize the native people throughout Alaska. And this is something we regard as highly regretful today. But he also recognized the value of caribou out in Siberia. This is an animal that can be tamed and can be used for food has been used for food by native Siberians. So he conscripted Norwegian reindeer herders to move a handful of these reindeer into Alaska. He wanted this to be an effort of the church. And so these experienced herders asked that a minister would go with them on this reindeer transfer/herding mission. So thus, a Norwegian reverend named Tellof L. Brevig, who was a robust 37-year-old Lutheran minister, was called upon for this purpose. And 1,300 caribou were herded from Siberia to Alaska as a food source for the native people. On August 1st, 1894, Tellof Brevig, his wife Julia, and his son Carl arrived at a place called at the time Reindeer Station, later known as Tellof Mission, and later still called Brevig Mission, named after Brevig himself. His assignment from the Norwegian Lutheran Church was to teach Eskimos the art of reindeer raising, function as teacher in the government school, and preach the gospel. Eventually, he also served as a doctor, postmaster, and a merchant for the community. Now, not long after his arrival, Brevig faced an endemic, which was probably measles, which killed thousands of natives throughout the state. And so upon immediate arrival, Brevig was faced with this endemic. The Lutheran orphanage was founded in what was then called Tellof Mission. And so the Lutherans responded by opening up an orphanage there. The devastation was so terrible that Brevig himself exasperated himself trying to be a doctor to the people. It looks like children during this endemic tended to survive, and parents tended to not make it. Now, fortunately, most churches and villages at the time in that area did open their doors, and they did the best that they could for the disease-ridden native people. Now, Brevig was especially broken over the devastation, watching the people he loved just being ravaged by this disease. He ended up giving up his entire salary which he received from the government for their help and support. There's quite a bit of more information about all of his activities in helping the people and I went through some of it, but I need to be brief here. By 1905, Brevig's ministry hit its peak with a Christmas celebration, which included 90 baptisms and many asking for the sacrament of Holy Communion, which is part of the Lutheran denomination. However, in 1908, Brevig's wife Julia and his son Carl died. I believe I read, if my memory served me right, that his wife died during childbirth and she was only 34 years old. That's sobering to me because I'm 41. I'm old now. Of this loss of his wife and child, Brevig said, quote, "As there was no other Protestant minister available, I had to preach the funeral sermon and perform the committal. Now, despite of the bitter cold, virtually all the people from Tellof attended. Thus, the mission's kindly ministering spirit passed on. She rests in the land of the people whom she loved so much, for whom she died. There sleep my son, my daughter, and my wife in the frozen Northland." Tellof left the village in 1908 because of the death of his family, but he returned in 1913 to continue the work until 1916, when he left for health issues and a successor took his place. And from what I read, the successor died pretty quickly of TB, tuberculosis, I believe, but other people continued the work there. Now, on the Evangelical Lutheran Church website, you can see a church group photo from the time of Tellof Brevig, and you can see a group of local native people in front of the church building. They're all wearing their Eskimo garb, and they all have these giant smiles of genuine delight on their faces, and it's truly a lovely photograph. There's men, women, and children in the picture, and it's lovely. There were a few notable Eskimo figures during that time. There was a native man named John Uktuk, who became a lay teacher in the area, and he worked with Tellof Brevig. Unfortunately, John Uktuk's wife and baby died, and John himself died from being crushed by an ice floe. Just one of those just horrific tragedies. Uktuk had 3 other children, and they were taken in by his sister, Mary. Now, Mary was sort of a famous figure back then because she was known for being very hospitable to outsider gold seekers with her igloo. She would offer them coffee and rest in her igloo, and that is located at a place today known as Mary's Igloo. Today, Mary's Igloo is no longer a village, but it's still used as a fish camp in the summertime. Mary herself was reported to have hosted Tellof Brevig in her igloo home, and eventually she became a devout Christian like her brother. Now, other impressive Inuits included the orphan girl named Emma. Emma learned to speak English and Norwegian. She was confirmed in 1900 by the church, but she wasn't confirmed by Brevig because he was gone at the time. She was confirmed by a guy named Chernagle, who was there while Brevig was gone. Now, Chernagle name caught my attention because the name Chernagle starts with the letters T and J. My last name starts with T and J. It's a very Scandinavian thing to have names like that. I am Scandinavian, so it is likely that I share a heritage with Pastor Chernagle of Brevig Mission back in the day. Now, Emma later married a reindeer herder because of the reindeer efforts at the time. And Brevig was able to marry her and her husband after he returned. Emma named her first child Julia after Brevig's late wife, indicating that she admired the late wife and Brevig also. Now, there was another figure named Sam Ailak. I think I pronounced that right, Ailak, who was orphaned because of the Spanish flu, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And he ended up at Tellof Mission. Now, Sam Ailak served with the Norwegian missionaries, and he became sort of a historian, as he's now known for his recorded history of the many happenings in Tellof Mission. There are a handful of more stories. Some of them include shamans becoming Christians. One shaman said, I heard about the gospel, and so my curiosity took me wherever it was preached, but I still could not understand. I did not know what the commandments and the creed meant. I wanted to understand more about this new life. Now I believe. I am glad we do not live in the past. Now, those are especially interesting stories. Shamans becoming Christians through the efforts of these missionaries. That obviously piques my interest. Now, in 1918, something devastating happened. It's something very well known as the poorly named Spanish flu. The Spanish flu outbreak in 1918 killed anywhere from 17 million to 50 million people worldwide. It's really difficult to, estimate these numbers, but it gives you some idea of its devastation. This was over an 18-month period. The death rate was estimated to be between 2.5% and 20%, making it one of the deadliest pandemics in history. Now, for comparison, the recent coronavirus pandemic, or is it endemic? Pandemic? I don't know what the difference is. But the coronavirus killed about 7 million people worldwide with a death rate of less than 1%. So Spanish flu, maybe 50 million. One estimate says up to 100 million, but seems like that was way up there for guessing. I don't know. Most sources say probably 50. So 50 million versus 7 million. Obviously, the Spanish flu was far more devastating, especially with a much smaller world population. Now, the Spanish flu came to Brevig Mission. Brevig Mission lost 72 of its 80 residents at the time. That is a 90% kill rate. Native Americans had no genetic resistance to the flu and therefore decimated many villages throughout the state. Brevig Mission was no exception. As the disease swept through the lower 48, the disease was believed to be brought to Alaska by a steamer from Seattle in the autumn of 1918 to Brevig Mission, and it spread throughout Alaska from there. So there probably was other places Spanish flu came in, but Brevig Mission, they say, is one of the original sources for Alaska. So that was interesting. The 72 bodies were buried by gold miners on a mass grave marked by white crosses. Now, this was interesting that in 1997, a team of scientists exhumed the frozen remains of an Inupiat woman, and they successfully recovered RNA from her lung tissue. And from this, they were able to analyze the structure of the virus. From this study, they believe that the virus originated in Fort Riley, Kansas. Now, how they can possibly know by studying the RNA that the Spanish flu came from Fort Riley, Kansas is beyond me. But somehow that is where they traced it to. And that's why I called it a poorly named virus, because it seems like it came from Kansas, had nothing to do with the Spanish in its origination. But I do know that the Spanish flu, I think they say it killed more people than in World War I, because those happened at the same time. Just devastating stuff. So then, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but from a Christian worldview, we have to naturally ask, why would God allow such a pandemic killing millions of people, especially the native people who got the disease from their unwelcome outside guests arriving on their shores? Now, I say unwelcome with a grain of salt. That's not universally true, but they obviously did not want this disease, and it arrived on their shores. Now, I don't know that we will ever know the answer to the why question, just as in the book of Job, which, by the way, was probably the first book of the Bible written, even written before Genesis. And so the first written book of the Bible was about why does suffering and evil happen? Job never got that why question answered. So we can only say that there is mystery and that this created world has been broken by sin. And the devastation of a broken world ought to simply break our hearts. Now, I am interested in things like apologetics or answering hard questions like that, but that is not within the scope of this episode. So let's see. Today, Brevig Mission is home to 428 residents, a wonderful recovery from the devastation of the Spanish flu. That is of 2020, so it could be more now. It lies on the western central Alaskan coast. And despite being a known community since the late 1800s, Brevig Mission first shows up in the census not until 1950, with a reported population of 109. So we see that from 1918, 1919, it went from 80 people down to 8, and by 1950 there was 109 residents. Brevig Mission Memorial Church, which received its upgraded name in 1963, is still active today and is a part of the Lutheran Church denomination. Brevig Mission has 2 runways, which is helpful for those shifting winds out there. It's at 38 feet of elevation because it's so close to the coast, just a stone's throw away. These runways are surprisingly short. They are gravel, and then the long one is 2,990 feet, and the shorter one is 2,110 feet. So I was kind of surprised how short these were. They're long enough for most, for the caravans, the more common charter planes. But still, I was kind of surprised how short they were. Now, being right on the coast, it is good that there are 2 RNAV approaches for all that nasty fog that comes in off the ocean. All right, we did it. We got through. I was surprised that we're just over 30 minutes, and I thought Brevig Mission would take so much longer. I think I summarized it decently. So that is it for Brevig Mission and Birch Creek. Next week, we are going to be covering Beluga and Buckland. Now, it was going to be a different village, but I realized that we're into the B's, and Beluga is not on the list that I have. And so it kind of goofed me up because I just know about Beluga because I've flown over it so many times. So anyway, I'm going to do Beluga, which I goofed and messed up. So we're a little bit out of alphabetical order, but I'm catching it. Next week, Beluga and Buckland. Now, Buckland's a special place because I have flown there quite a lot, and I know a good number of people that live there. So I'm very much looking forward to getting to Buckland. All right, guys, that is it for today's episode of the story of these 2 villages today. We'll see you next time when we get to the next 2 villages, Beluga and Buckland. See ya.